Hello and welcome to the third lesson of my lesson series. This lesson is going to pick up where lesson 2.5 left off. So we're going to be talking about how to determine key from a basic chord progression. This is actually also going to wrap up our discussion of triads for the moment, which means we can finally get into that advanced chord construction that I've been alluding to for the past 3 lessons. So with that being said, let's get into today's lesson by revisiting an old friend, a giant sheet of yellow paper. So lesson 2, we took the C major scale and we built triads off of each note of the C major scale by taking the third and the fifth of that note as it appeared in the scale. In other words, we took the scale and we built the chords. For determining key, we're going to kind of reverse engineer that. We're going to take the chords and the notes that comprise them and attempt to rebuild a major scale to determine what key we're in. Now this is kind of a longhand method for determining key, so it comes with all the usual bonuses of a longhand method and all the usual negatives. The bonuses is it gives a ton of information. So if you're really confused, it makes everything abundantly clear. Or if you're playing a more complex piece and you want more information, like especially for jazz pieces when you want to see all of the chord tones, it helps you with that. Or jazz again, or even actually with any music, if you want to determine what the pitch axis is and kind of play around with that, it helps you do that. The negative is the usual negative. It's time consuming. You know, if you were in a time constrained situation or you're trying to do something on the fly in your head, this is not the method you want to do. You would never try to think this out in your head to try and figure something out. That being said, I am going to show a shorthand method. Excuse me, still got that tickle. I am going to show a shorthand method after the longhand method, but it is important that you know the longhand method because the information that comes from it is what the shorthand method is based on. That being said, let's get into the examples. Alright, so in the bottom here I have a pretty average chord progression, D, B minor, G, A. And we're going to take this chord progression, we're going to try and break it down to determine what key we're in. So the first step for the longhand method is to spell out each chord. So what do I mean by spelling out each chord? Well, essentially all you do is you write every note that is in the chord, that the chord's comprised of, and you write them out in the order of their function. So starting with D major, for example. D is the root note, as we know from the name of the chord. We're told it's a major chord, so we need the major third, so it's D to F sharp. And we know major chords also have a perfect fifth in them, so it's D, F sharp, A. And that's all the notes that are in D major. That's that chord completely spelled out. We can do the same thing for B minor. We know it's B because of the name of the chord. We also know from the name of the chord we need a minor third, so B to D is a minor third, and we need a perfect fifth again. So B to F sharp is a perfect fifth. So we get B, D, F sharp. If any of that is confusing, you might want to go back to some of the earlier lessons and review intervals, or you might want to practice your intervals again. It is really essential that you can kind of just quickly knock that out. As we go down and do the other two chords, though, you'll see it's the same idea, very easy. G, B, D, and A, C sharp, E. So those are all our notes. And the second step then, after we've spelled out every single chord, is to take those notes and try to arrange them in a major scale. Now, there's a few things we have though to help guide us so we don't just randomly pick notes. So first, the key of the progression has to be determined by one of the chords of the progression. So that means one of those chords has to be the root note. So we have the root note's either going to be D, B, G, or A. Second thing is typically the first chord of a progression is the root chord. So that kind of leans us toward D. But just to do a slight digression, you could obviously know that there's no way it could be B because B is a minor chord and there's no way you can have a minor chord be the root note, root chord of a major scale. That just makes absolutely no sense. So really we're choosing between G, G, and A. And then like I said, typically, not always, but typically the first chord of a progression is the root chord. So let's start with D. So we take D as our first note, and then we go note by note, seeing if we have it, and then writing it down. So the next note would obviously be E. So we go, all right, do we have E? Yep, there's an E in the fifth of A, so we write down E. Then the next note would be F sharp. All right, there's an F sharp in the third of D and the fifth of B minor, so F sharp's there. We know we have G, A, and B because we're using chords that are G, A, and B, specifically G major, A major, and B minor. And then we know we have the C sharp because that's the third of A major. And then we can write D again to complete the octave if we wanted. I was a little lazy and ran out of room, so I didn't write it. So that gives us all of those notes right now. All the notes that have comprised these chords are now written out in a scale. Then we check, all right, is that scale a major scale? So does it match our scale formula that we know? So we go, all right, D is a tone, so that's good. E to F sharp is a tone, still good. F sharp to G is a semitone, still good. G to A is a tone, good. A to B is a tone, good. B to C sharp is a tone, good. And C sharp, if I wrote that D in there, would be a semitone. So perfect. So it does match the major scale. Our guess was right. The first chord of the progression was the root chord. And we are playing in the key of D major because it matches the D major scale. Now, but what if we didn't know that the first chord was usually the root chord? You know, what if we didn't know that? What if we had started with G? Well, we would have realized by starting with G that eventually the scale formula breaks down. So, for example, starting with G, G to A is a tone. All right, that's fine. A to B is a tone, still fine. But B to C sharp is not a semitone, it's a full tone. So that means, yes, we are playing in a mode of G, or there is a mode of G available. And we'll talk about modes in a later lesson. But it's not the G major scale, so we're not playing in G major. If you did the same thing with A, you would have the same result. You would realize eventually that, hey, something's a little fishy here, that's not quite right. It doesn't match the major scale. Now, like I said, that's a longhand method, so that makes everything clear. You get to see all the chords spelled out. You get to see all the notes that are available. You can even mess around with the notes to see all the modes that are available by starting with each note. But that was kind of time-consuming. That took us at least 4 minutes to do, which that's longer than some songs are. Now, the shorthand method of it is using a little bit of induction, though, to kind of flip things. So, what's the induction? Well, each scale is made up of 7 notes, and each scale is made up of a unique combination of 7 notes, that no two scales have the same 7 notes. Because of that, no two scales can have the same 7 chords, because the chords are built from the scales, which means when we're trying to figure out what key we're in, or trying to find what scale we're using, based on a progression, we can just kind of look at the chords and see if those chords match or are unique to one scale or not. Now, some progressions aren't unique, but a majority are. For example, C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, and B minor flat 5 are all chords that are unique to the C major scale. No other scale will have all of these chords. And typically when you get a progression, you'll be able to kind of see right off the bat what key it's in. For example, if you had like C, F, G, that has to be in C major because there's no other scale that has both F major and G major. Or if you had, E minor, D minor, and G. That's the same thing. No scale will have that combination of chords. So since most chord progressions are usually 3 or more chords, you can usually pin down the key pretty quickly because of that. And the shorthand method, therefore, is just simply to memorize what the 7 chords are for each scale and identify them. Now, like I said at the beginning of the lesson, this is how to identify key for basic chord progressions. And sorry about shaking the camera, the table's a little wobbly. But that does kind of limit your options. And for example, there are Nirvana songs that don't really follow this, and I'll take a quick discussion of that in a second. But this does work for a lot of songs that you will encounter. For example, a lot of Bob Dylan songs will work out fine. A lot of just the basic chord progressions that you write will be pretty close to this. And that's another thing to look for, is sometimes there's just one chord is different or one chord is altered. For example, the Foo Fighters song Walk goes A major, E major, B minor, not C minor, D minor. So that's almost in the key of A major. A is the first chord, E major is the 5th of A major, B minor is the 2nd of A major, and D minor doesn't quite fit, but that chord progression is still closest to A. So you can simply take that D minor, okay, you just made a minor out of the 4th chord. And that actually is a very common move in music. You'll see a lot of like old 50s pop songs use that a lot. The Beatles use that a lot too, actually. So when you're ever confused, if you get it like it's almost in a key but only one chord is off, double check always to make sure it's not off by one, because it actually is in a different key. But sometimes you can kind of go, well, it's closest to this key. And now what I said about Nirvana pieces, you take a song kind of like Rape Me by Nirvana, which goes C, A, E, G. This really isn't in a key. I mean, at least by conventional definitions, because you have the problem of none of those chords are in any of the same key, and even they're similar chords depending on which perspective you pick from. So, for example, if we say the song's in C, we want to think the song's in C. All right, well, you have the root chord C. All right, that works. That's kind of like our standard. The root chord comes first. All right, A is a major sixth, a major version of the sixth chord of the scale. So that's kind of weird. E is a major version of the third chord. That's also weird. And then G is the fifth. All right, so you get two weird chords and a root chord and a fifth chord, which that's pretty good. Then if you take A, you get essentially the same problem. A is, all right, so A is our root chord. E is the fifth of A, so that's good. But G is the flattened seventh. So that's actually not as weird as other chords. You see that a little bit more common. That's more like a bluesy thing to do. And C is the flattened third. All right, so that's, again, both of those are a little odd, but those are more bluesy, so maybe if you want to think of it from a blues perspective, that would actually work out. The point of that exercise, though, is like you could do the same thing with E, and you do the same thing with G, and see which one makes the most sense and which one seems the strongest to you. By the end of the day, when you get really ambiguous progressions, you can play them ambiguously. You can see them as you want to see them. So some basic chord progressions are really controlled by key, but the more advanced ones, it's not that there's more going on in the sense of they're still in a key, you just have to see this voodoo magic behind it. If it's ambiguous, and you can play it as though it's ambiguous. I want to make that clear. So all the stuff we did to determine key is important, and you should practice that by writing out progressions and seeing if you can figure out what key it's in, or taking Bob Dylan songs. If you can, if you want to do ear training, figure them out, figure out what the chords are, then see what key it's in. Or if your ear isn't quite so strong, look up some chords to any song that you really like and see if you can figure out what key it's in. And also when you're dealing with songs that maybe you can't determine the key, think of what the differences would be between the perspectives that you have by seeing what the chords are. So which one is the most normal, which one sounds the most regular. So that actually wraps up today's lesson. There'll be a few points that will come probably in some later lessons. I'll talk to you about some of how you use those weird chords, like having a flattened seventh chord or having a flattened third chord, and why I said that was bluesy. But for the most part, that's going to wrap up today. So I'll see you next time for advanced chord construction. All right, thank you for watching, and have a good day.